joining us today. This mic is being a little fidgety. But thanks for joining us today for what is the last of the Veg Out series. So 4 out of 4. Some of you have been here the whole time, and I appreciate that. And I hope we'll be able to continue to do this in the years to come. As you may or may not know, this was a pilot project, and we were looking to see what the sort of response would be and how I would do and all of that. So I really thank you guys for showing up time after time. What we're talking about today is kale, okay? And kale is one of those foods that's been designated a what? Superfood, right? So whether or not superfoods actually exist is up for debate, but it is undeniable that kale is a food that contains a lot of nutrition in the form of vitamins and minerals and fiber, okay? So we can all get behind that. I didn't introduce myself. For those of you who may not know, my name is Vanessa Oliver. I'm a dietitian with UK Health and Wellness. Karen is my lovely assistant today, and she is the other dietitian with UK Health and Wellness. So you'll see the two of us behind a lot of the programming for LiveWell, UK Health and Wellness's initiative. Okay, so back to kale. So if you are getting a CSA this summer, then you may have been in the group that has been receiving kale every single week since like June. Do I have any of those people here? No? Okay. I have been receiving kale every single week since June. And I consider myself a fairly creative cook, and sometimes I am just really tired of seeing kale. So that sort of inspired me to create this particular program today. Also because kale is a great transition crop. It does well in Kentucky pretty much throughout the year, and it actually even becomes sweeter after it frosts. So you will see kale in your CSA baskets or at the farmer's market pretty much all year round until we hit that really hard killing frost, okay? So if you're considering joining a fall CSA program, and some of the farms that you are members of may offer this program, you will likely continue to see kale pretty much going on up until December, okay? So if you are looking for some new recipes, I try to include that for you all today, all right? One of the reasons that kale is considered so nutritious is that it's really high in vitamins and minerals, as I mentioned. So for about a little over a cup of kale chopped, okay, and this is raw kale, you're only going to get about 30 calories or so, but you're going to get huge amounts of vitamin A, vitamin C, and vitamin K, all right? And that's all going to be above what the recommended daily allowance is by the USDA. You're also going to get great amounts of fiber, even a little bit of protein, okay? In that cup of kale, you're going to get about 3 grams of protein, which is pretty decent for a vegetable, right? You'll also get a lot of other types of things like antioxidants, not just the antioxidants that are in the vitamin A and the vitamin C, but also things like quercetin, which is thought to be an anti-inflammatory substance, okay? And then lutein and zeaxanthin, which if you've heard that egg yolks are good for your eyes, it's because of these two antioxidants, okay? Lutein and zeaxanthin are thought to be to aid in the fight against macular degeneration, and kale is a great source of these two particular antioxidants as well, okay? There are a few different kinds of kale, and I've got 3 of them out here. This is the one that's probably the most familiar for you guys. So this is a green curly leaf kale. It's also known as Scottish green kale. And in fact, kale is such a large part of Scottish and Irish cuisine that it's synonymous with the word health. Okay, so if a Scotsman asks you if you're off your kale, it means that are you not feeling good, right? So it is a huge part of the cuisine in that part of the world. We do also have a Tuscan black kale. This is also called lacinato kale or dinosaur kale, which if you're trying to get your kids to eat kale, then I would totally call my kale dinosaur kale. The reason being it's thought is because it's a little bit scaly looking. It looks like that it might, what a dinosaur skin might look like. It's also referred to as cavolo nero, and that just simply means black kale or black cabbage. And this is used in a lot of Tuscan stews and soups, particularly ribollito, if that's something that you've heard of. It's a vegetable stew that's thickened with bread that's very popular in Tuscany. And the reason why it's called black cabbage, too, is because it's actually part of the cabbage family. So the cabbage family is known as brassica, and it is a huge family in the vegetable world. So not only cabbage and kale belong to it, but Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and cauliflower do as well. All of those vegetables originally came from one single plant, so that's kind of cool. And then the last example I have right here is known as a red Russian kale, and you can see that the stems are kind of a really pretty purpley red, okay? You will see all three of these and maybe a couple of others either in your CSA box or at the farmer's market, okay? If you are selecting kale from the farmer's market, you do want to look for nice crisp leaves, okay? That's just a good indication that it's been picked recently. You don't want it dried out. Avoid getting any that have turned yellow or are very wilted. If they're just a little bit wilted, you can actually soak them in a bowl of cold water, and you can do this with any green, and you'll see those greens refresh after just a few minutes, okay? So if it's just a little bit wilted, maybe your box stood on your counter for a little bit too long while you were trying to figure out what to do with your kale, then that's what you can do to sort of refresh it. The smaller leaves will have a kind of a brighter flavor than the larger leaves, and they'll be a little bit more tender as well. But large leaves like this are still edible. These would maybe be ones that would be best for a stew, okay? Something that will cook a little bit longer in some liquid and help tenderize that leaf, okay? If you're storing your kale, make sure to keep it refrigerated, and don't wash it before you store it, okay? Wash it just before use. When you do wash it, a salad spinner is a great way to wash it. Try to keep it away from other produce as much as possible, just because it is very susceptible to ethylene and other gases that your produce might release, and that can cause the kale to yellow just a little bit. It will do just fine in the back of your refrigerator, though. It's not a particularly delicate leaf, so if it's a little bit colder in the back of your fridge, that'll be okay, all right? And then wash it right before you use it, as I mentioned, and then you'll also want to stem it. So people have asked me, maybe y'all have been curious too, if the kale stem is edible. Have you guys tried?
I've tried it. I didn't think
you haven't tried it? I see Lauren's nodding. It is edible, okay? It's a little bit tougher than the rest of the kale leaf. If it's a particularly large stem like this one, you might peel it and you will take some of that fiber away. But if you're using the kale for smoothies or for juice, then I would just go on and throw the whole leaf in there, okay? Because, I mean, it's fiber. It's the vitamins, it's the kale. You'll still be getting all of that good stuff, okay? If you're going to use your kale to saute or for soup or stew, then it's a really simple process where you're just pulling the leaves off the stem. And sometimes you'll see something where it says unzip the kale from the stem. If you hold the stem in one hand and just pull the leaves down from the other, it's pretty simple to do, okay? So if you don't want to use the stem, then you can just put that aside and chop the leaf as you need to. So I mentioned that yes?
I was just going to add in, I found it very helpful to use my kitchen scissors and just...
To use your kitchen scissors. Oh, yeah, that's a great tip as
well.
Because
you would have like a whole bunch, and I would just sit down and I would just like zip, and then also, instead of tearing it, I found cutting it with the scissors made it just stronger. Like, so I just found kitchen scissors and kale were like...
Absolutely. If you have a pair of kitchen shears, whether they came in your knife kit or maybe you went on and ordered them or whatever, that is a really great tool for a leaf such as this. For any leaf, turnip or collard greens, certainly you could do that with too. And with this type of kale in particular, again, that Tuscan black kale, then the kitchen shears are even more handy because these stems might tear a little bit. And if you do want to get them out of the leaf, then that scissor is going to be very helpful. So thank you. Okay, so I did mention that you can put the stem in smoothies, and I've got actually a little bit of smoothie for you guys to try as your first sample for today. So this particular smoothie, you can see that it's in the mason jar because, you know, mason jars are trendy. We have that on the front of your card here. And this is a non-dairy smoothie, so if anyone doesn't do dairy, then this can be for you. It's got coconut milk, which is light coconut milk in there, as well as frozen mango, banana, kale, which is pretty apparent from the green color, and a little bit of orange juice. Okay, so it's pretty tasty. There's no other sweetener in there besides the fruit, all right? And this would be a great sort of snack or breakfast. There are 2 big leaves like this of kale in the little bit that I made for you, which was probably about 12 to 14 ounces or so, okay? And I did put the stems in there as well. Now, this is a high-powered blender that we have here. It's a Vitamix, so it doesn't take quite as long to really get that nice smooth consistency. So if you have a less powerful blender, you may need to blend it just a little bit longer, all right? But that's just an example of an easy way to use up a few bits of kale. If you have children, I'm pretty sure that they would enjoy that as well. If you don't want to use coconut milk, you can use any liquid you like. Almond milk would be just fine. It may not be as creamy, or any other sort of dairy or non-dairy milk. Yes?
I'm almost thinking to myself, I should just save the stems and just use stems. How do you think it would turn out if I just used stems?
You know, I've never done that, but you can let me know.
I was like thinking to myself, like, oh, that would be a great way to use my stems.
You know, and it absolutely would be. Or if you're a juicer, I don't know if I have any juicers in the group here, but that's certainly a good way to use your stems up as well. Absolutely. And there are people that also, I think I mentioned in the very first class how you can pretty much pickle anything. There are people that do pickle their kale stems. Absolutely. So that's something else that you can do too. All right. Any other questions or comments about this smoothie? Is this something you all think that you would make at home? Yeah. And it's pretty too. Karen pointed out that it perfectly matches my apron. But, you know, all the better, right? Just a couple more sort of tips. If you are looking at a recipe and you're wondering exactly what 1 pound of kale means, sometimes that can be a little bit challenging. Monica's like, yeah. 1 pound of kale equals about 6 cups of raw leaves, okay? Or 1 1/4 cups of cooked leaves. So kale cooks down quite a lot, all right? So what I have right here is actually like 1 bunch of kale. So if you consider that a vegetable serving, of which we're told to get at least 3 a day, depending on what our calorie needs are, okay? But a vegetable serving is going to be about ½ a cup of cooked kale. So you can easily, between 2 people, eat a bunch of kale, not get too much there, and that's going to be about, 1 to 2 veggie servings. So that's not so bad. It's an easy way. Once you sort of look at your kale that way, it doesn't seem quite as daunting, let's say. Okay? All right. So the next dish that I'm going to have you guys try is going to be a kale salsa. So I'm kind of like softballing you in here, all right? So the kale salsa that we have today is a pretty traditional salsa. We do have this card here. That's what it looks like there. And I did not put any jalapeno or spicy stuff in here. So this is a mild salsa. If you like spicy food, I would certainly suggest putting in some hot peppers. So this has tomato, cilantro, onion, garlic, and again, big leaves of kale. So if you are looking to get rid of some kale, maybe have some kids in the house or a finicky husband, then this would be a great way to do it. Okay, it tastes like regular salsa. And this is a kind of dish that would probably keep for maybe about 2 or 3 days in the fridge. After that, the onion and the garlic is going to get quite strong. But you can certainly make it in smaller batches and use it as you need to. I did use Roma tomatoes in this recipe, just FYI, because they're a little bit less watery. But you could do this in the food processor or in the blender. And it's certainly really, really easy. Yes, Monica?
Have you seen any canning recipes for salsa that use kale?
That's a good question. I have not. I would, however, just go on and substitute kale for some of the bell pepper in the canning recipe. Because whenever you're canning, right, you don't want to mess with the stated recipe too much because you may alter the pH of the recipe. And the pH is what's important when it comes to food safety in canning. So since kale and green bell pepper are going to be pretty similar as far as pH are concerned, I would substitute in for some of the measurement of the bell pepper. Yeah. But yeah, good question. But this is a fresh salsa, like I said, so it's kind of a restaurant-style salsa, and I thought it came out pretty good. So, all right. Any other questions for me regarding some of the recipes or just kale in general? All right, some other ways to cook kale. I know you all have seen one or two things that probably keep popping up if you've been Googling recipes for kale. All right. So one of them is the ubiquitous kale salad. Kale salad is everywhere. And what does it tell you to do when you are making the kale salad? Does anyone? Massage the kale. Exactly. Right? So massaging the kale, it's kind of a funny term, but it's in every single recipe, right? So does anyone not know what they mean when they say massage the kale? Okay. All right. So when you're massaging the kale, you're taking your leaves, which you have destemmed, okay? And you've got a little bit, you've got them in a bowl, and you pour your oil over them, and then you literally are massaging the oil into the kale. Yes, and it softens it. That's exactly what it does. You are starting to break down the cell walls of that kale, letting that oil in there. Not only is it going to soften the kale, but it's also going to start to give it a little bit more flavor. Usually when you are massaging that kale, there's a little bit of salt in that bowl too. That salt acts as an abrasive, and that also helps to break down the walls and get some flavor into that kale. Usually after you give that kale the massage, the spa treatment, whatever, it'll sit for about 15 to 30 minutes, and that's how that kale will get more palatable and sort of a more pleasing texture to eat raw, okay? But I mean, who would have thought like 10 years ago we'd all be sitting down to these giant bowls of raw kale, right? It was always just like a garnish at the Kroger, you know, in the produce section, right? But so that's definitely something that we've all come to know and love. What's the second recipe that you guys have seen maybe most frequently when it comes to kale?
Kale chips.
The kale chips, right. So these are very easy to make at home. If you buy them in the store, has anyone bought them in the store? How much were they?
$4 for a very small thing.
They are so expensive. Holy moly. You can get like the fancy vegan so-and-so kale chips, right? They're like $8.
And they're not as good as...
So this is a very simple preparation, okay? There is oil and salt and pepper on these guys. I did make them in the convection oven, so it took me literally like 12 seconds. At home, it'll take you a little bit longer. There are two schools of thought when it comes to making kale chips. You can do it either low and slow or high and quickly. It'll work either way, okay? The more spread out the kale is, the crisper it will get, all right? I'm going to go on and just pop in another pan right here and just sort of see what happens. You'll see it's about a minute or two. So that kale just has a little bit of olive oil on it. It is destemmed, okay? And we'll get some fresh ones just out of the oven. Now the dipping sauce that I have here is a lemon yogurt sauce. It's made with lemon juice, fresh lemon zest, a little bit of garlic, and some Greek yogurt. So you get a little bit of protein in there too. You don't have to use a dipping sauce, of course, or you could use any other dipping sauce that you like. But my husband loves these things. Y'all have seen Greg. He's very sorry he can't be here today. But I can make 2 or so trays of these kale chips, and he will destroy them. And they shrink quite a lot when you cook them. So again, this is a great way to use a lot of kale, and they will stay good for quite some time. If you have any left over and you're getting tired of just eating them as chips, you can kind of crumble them up or for brown rice or some other whole grain, and it just sort of lends a nice umami quality or a savory quality to what you're eating. So that's something you can do with kind of the dregs that are left over in the pan. And that is this recipe here you can see right there. So another thing I like to put on my kale chips if I'm getting really fancy is commercial barbecue seasoning. If anyone has tried that, you can make kind of barbecue kale chips, and it is pretty tasty as well. Yes?
Another version I've done is a little sesame oil and some sesame seeds.
Sure.
That should
Yeah.
be really good.
That would be
You
delicious.
can't use all sesame oil because it's so strong, but like
Yeah.
just put a little bit of oil in with the olive
Exactly.
oil, and then it gives it that flavor. And little sesame seeds, just
For a little bit of crunch.
yeah, exactly. It kind of looks pretty on there too.
Yeah. Yeah, if you use like a toasted sesame oil, you're going to get a lot of flavor for just a little bitty, tiny bit of oil. And you can use any oil that you want to. There are so many different ones out there. I use olive oil because that's the primary oil that I keep in my house.
I did it once with coconut oil,
Uh-huh.
and it gave it a little bit of coconut flavor and made it a little sweeter, and I kind of like that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, any oil would definitely work. And if you like coconut oil, and if you're looking for, maybe you can even call it like a Thai kale chip or something like that, you could certainly make this sauce and maybe use lime zest instead of lemon zest, and that would be really good.
Never had a dipping sauce with my kale chips. You
Right.
onto something.
Yeah. I mean, it comes to people, and again, if you're trying to get your children to enjoy kale, kids like to dip. You know, grown-ups like to dip too, but kids like to dip. So, okay. Any other questions? All right, so beyond, chips and then beyond the kale salad, a lot of us grew up eating kale either steamed or boiled or braised or cooked in some sort of liquid. Usually there's a ham hock or some piece of bacon in there. A smoked turkey leg is another alternative if you're looking for just a little bit less fat. That would be something else that you could consider. As I mentioned, the Tuscan sort of part of Italy puts kale in a lot of soups and stews, and so that's something that you can also do. I think those are about done. So you can see how much that cooked down. That's pretty crazy. So I'll let those cool, and then we can munch on those too at the end of class. But beyond soups and stews and salads, certainly you can toss it in pasta, okay? And that's or any other whole grain, and that's something that is usually what we all do with the vegetables that maybe we're not really sure what to do with. You can certainly saute kale in olive oil and add it to your pasta. Now, if you are maybe not eating as much carbs, or if you're looking for something maybe with kale and maybe with a little bit of cheese and a little bit of carbs in the form of bread cubes, then this is going to be one more recipe that I'm going to show you today. So this is the baked cheesy kale. This was a surpriser. It's really good. It's really simple, and it kind of sticks with you. So what I've done with this kale here is I've just sauteed it with some onion and garlic. Okay, I added a little bit of fresh thyme, and then this is Gruyere cheese. You could use whatever cheese you like, but Gruyere is what the recipe calls for. And then these are just little croutons that I made out of day-old bread. Okay, these are just toasted in the oven. Once you put this in a pan, again, you just pop it in the super oven here, but I forget what it says on your recipe for how long to cook it, maybe about 20 minutes or so. And this would be a really good vegetarian main course or a side for a meat entree. Okay, so it's a little bit different, again, if you're looking for a little bit of carbs with your kale, but maybe not the whole sort of pan of pasta, then this would be something to try. And we'll try that in just a couple minutes while we try the last dish that I've got already prepared for you. So has anyone tried the Trader Joe's spinach balls? They keep them in the freezer. They're like little orders. Okay, first of all, these things are delicious, which is kind of like a little bit dangerous, right? So this was sort of my attempt to recreate these with kale. And that sort of leads me to my point that any of these recipes that I'm showing you today, with the possible exception of the kale chips, you can really use any green, okay, in any of these recipes. The kale, for reasons I outlined earlier, of course I'm doing today, but these were based on a spinach ball recipe. They do have some wheat product in them, so if anyone, and dairy, so if anyone has any allergies, then these are not for you. But they're super easy to make. I've got some kale, again, that I just sauteed with some onion and garlic. And I'm just going to give that a little chop here. And And I'm adding that to a bowl here that I've got some panko breadcrumbs, some cream cheese that's been softened, a little bit of feta cheese as well, and a little bit of cumin and cilantro. I think that covers all of the ingredients. Now you can certainly chop this kale in a food processor for a more uniform texture. And truth be told, that's what I did for the little balls that you guys are eating now, just because it made it a little bit easier while I was prepping yesterday. But if you don't have a food processor, you can also chop the kale by hand. And so what I'm going to do is just mix this up, sort of squish it all together. And this would be a great project if you do have children. Once you get everything in the bowl, little kids do like to form things with their hands, which I'm sure you all have noticed before. And you can also, since they can mix it with their hands, it makes it kind of fun as well. So kind of squish it all together. There is an egg in here as well. It says 1 to 2 eggs, or rather it may say 1 egg. You'll have to tell me. It says 2 eggs. Okay. So I have 1 in here right now. Depending kind of on how moist your kale is, depending on the weather, depending on all kinds of things, it may vary how much egg you need to add. So start with 1 and then add another if you need it. The same thing with the breadcrumbs. Sometimes it works a little bit better with a little bit more breadcrumb. This is one of those recipes, just like when you're making regular meatballs, just like when you're making anything else like this, you kind of have to sort of just see what happens. So this seems like it's going to hold together just fine. Another tip, if you make this ahead of time and let it sit overnight, it's going to get even better texture-wise. Okay, so if you have the time, then that's something that you can do. If you don't, then that's okay too. And then just simply go on and form them into little balls like this. You can make them any size. You can bake them in the oven, as I did for you guys today, or you can saute them in a pan. I tried them both ways. I actually prefer them baked in the oven, so that's why I did this for you guys today. At home, it just gets a little bit, I don't know, a little greasy, maybe. But some people do like a little bit more of that sort of fried texture, and they will get a little bit browner in the pan. These are really good with a marinara sauce, just like regular meatballs. You could even make them little sliders, or you could form them and just serve them with toothpicks at a party like I did for you all today. Okay, so I'm going to go on and just finish forming those and check on our kale that's already in the oven. Any questions for me right now?
My mom fixes a lot of kielbasa kale. She'll steam them together, Polish sausage, and kale. She'll make soup. And we had a lot of red Russian kale from the CSA, and it would not work. It was too stiff. Do we need to, would massaging it maybe help?
It must just have more, maybe a little bit more fiber than what was in the kale maybe that you grew up eating. I would say, let's see, so you just did it in the pan, just straight?
She usually, will steam the kale on top of the sausage with a bowl over it.
Okay.
And it would not,
everything?
Yeah, it would not reduce down when it was red Russian kale, but it would with the regular kale.
Yeah. You could certainly try massaging it and see if that would work and see if that oil and salt would help break down the cells there. I think it just has a little bit maybe more structure than that green curly leaf kale. So that's why it wasn't working. The other thing that you could try is microwaving it first and then steaming it with the sausage, and that would kind of speed up the cooking process a little bit there. Yeah, I'm not sure though. The one thing I will say that if you are baking these balls and you do want them to get a little bit brown, I usually just put a little bit of pan spray on top, because all this is oil. It's just aerosolized oil. So that will help give it a little bit more brownness in the oven, and without having to fry them like that. So let's see. All right, got our baked cheese kale. We'll go on and dish this up too. without burning ourselves. Let's see the best way to do this. Yeah, that'll work. Oh, okay, great. There's spoons right behind you there. Okay, so as I mentioned, you can do these recipes with pretty much any other greens. Some examples of greens that would be good with this would be something like spinach or Swiss chard. Okay, remember spinach or Swiss chard do cook a little bit faster than kale. Okay, so it won't take quite as long. Something like collard greens would be a pretty straight comparison. Turnip greens are going to be another one, but they are going to have a little bit of that stronger flavor. So maybe keep that in mind when you are choosing to flavor your kale. Okay, but if you are going to continue on with your CSA and go on and get a fall season one, you will certainly be getting a lot of these greens in your box. So maybe some of these recipes today will sort of kind of steer you towards some new things and maybe try some old favorites as well. Yes?
So I'm still having an issue with the beet greens.
I'm sorry, you're still...
I still have an issue with beet greens.
With beet greens?
I know we talked about it a little bit, and we did like beet green salad.
Yes.
Do you think beet greens would be usable in these recipes?
Yeah, they certainly would. So it's particularly with something like this cheesy bake or with the salsa, definitely with the smoothies.
Definitely.
You could certainly, yeah, use the beet greens. For the chips, I'm not sure
Right.
if they would work, if they have enough structure to hold up to the oven like that. But beet greens are also really nice in a frittata as well.
Like instead of spinach.
Yes, instead of spinach. And then also, if you're ever making pesto with like the last of the basil, you can use about half of your total, if you look at your total basil measurement, you can substitute about half of that for blanched beet greens. So blanched just means that you dip it in hot water quite briefly and then shock it in ice water so it stays that bright green color. You can make a really nice beet green pesto and then serve that over roasted beets, and it's
So blanch the greens
yes.
and then use it.
Yes.
Okay.
It's another little step. It sort of preserves the integrity of the sauce, so it's not like raw greens so much.
That's good. Thank you.
Any other?
Kale or non-kale vegetable questions? I'm happy to answer them. Well, I'm just about done talking about kale. I've been talking about it for about 40 minutes or so. So thank you guys so much for coming out. Again, this is the last Veg Out class of the series. We really enjoyed having you guys here. We're going to do one final drawing. Did everyone get their name into the bag? Oh, okay.
Oh, trust me, your name.
All right. So again, we've been giving away spiralizers. Now that it is sweet potato and winter squash season, you could certainly use this spiralizer on one of those items. Of course, if you're still getting inundated with zucchini, it's great to use on that too. Tanya's actually going to have a zucchini zoodle salad coming up in an hour at 2 p.m. So you guys can always come back for another little sample of zoodles if that's interesting to you. And the winner of the spiralizer today is Liz Hillard. All right. Well, again, thanks you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
And bring some cards back. We've got plenty of extras if you have coworkers that would like some of those cards. And if you have any questions about this class or any of the previous classes, let me know. We'll have the video online for this fairly soon. And then, of course, past videos are also on our LiveWell blog, so you can find that too. So thanks, you guys.
Thanks.